The Iliad, Book 7. This is Your Mythology Book Club with Daniel Lucas Murphy.
Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm your host, Daniel. In this series, we're doing a very close reading of the Iliad, one book at a time. This is episode 7, and so we'll cover book 7. By listening to this entire podcast series, you will gain a thorough understanding and appreciation of the Iliad. As always, I'll be reading the text of the Iliad to you from the translation by Lang, Leaf, and Myers, interspersed with my own interpretations and those of various scholars whose works you will find referenced in the show notes. The Iliad comes to us from the depths of time. It was ancient to the ancients, who collected it from among even older stories and compiled it into the version we have. This means it's an artifact of literary culture that has been filtered through the minds of people from multiple time periods, each of which represent cultures far different from our own. Therefore, I'll go on tangents to explore some of the more confusing or intriguing historical, religious, and cultural points we'll come across. I'm not a professional scholar, but I am a very well-read amateur who has read various translations of the Iliad many, many times over the years. How I present the Iliad to you in this series is exactly how I read it each time, appreciating the language, enjoying the story, but also frequently pausing to ask why. Why are the characters doing these strange things? What about their time in history, their culture or religion would make them want to have done what they just did? Over the years, I've taken my questions to the scholarly literature and have been able to gain more and more insight with each question I've researched. Throughout this series, I'll share these insights with you. Getting a handle on why the characters in the Iliad are doing some of the things they're doing will help us understand their motivations. Seeing their motivations in the light of their own time period, culture, and religion will allow us to discover the very human story that forms the heart of the Iliad. As always, we'll start with a quick recap of the previous book before moving on to the current. In Book 6, Diomedes' ongoing Aristeia was topmost on the Trojans' minds. The Greeks were at the very walls of Troy, threatening to take the city. Trojan seer, Prince Helenos, had a vision of how they could save the city. It was a two-part plan. First, Hector and Aeneas rallied the troops around the Scaean Gate. Once this had been accomplished, Hector went to his mother, Queen Hecabe, who may be referred to as Hecuba if you're reading an edition with Roman names. Hector relayed to Hecabe the vision's command for her to lead the women of the city in making an offering to Athene, an attempt to placate the patron goddess of Troy, who up until this point has been empowering Diomedes to bring about their destruction. Hecabe did this, and then we continued to follow Hector as he interacted first with his brother Alexandros and his wife Helen, and then with Hector's own wife Andromache and their son, baby Astyanax, in a touching family scene. At the close of Book 6, Alexandros caught up with Hector, and the two of them marched towards the Scaean Gate and war against the Greeks. Book 7, here we are. Oh my, Book 7 is interesting. We're at an important juncture here in our trip through the Iliad. Books 1 and 2 were the opening, our introduction to the characters and the conflict. We met Agamemnon, we met Achilles, we were witness to their argument and haven't seen much of Achilles since. Starting with Book 3, we entered a phase where the mortals on both sides, Greek and Trojan, attempted a solution to the war, an attempt which the gods undermined. Alexandros, aka Paris, and Menelaus had agreed to fight each other one-on-one for Helen and the treasure and a resolution to the entire war, the peace through dueling plan. They held a sacrifice. The leaders of both sides, Agamemnon and Priam, met on the field. Oaths were sworn to suspend hostilities between the armies and to let the two men seeking Helen's hand to fight it out. The duel commenced. Menelaus was winning, and this mortal-led attempt at peace was nearly accomplished, only for Aphrodite to yoink Alexandros off the field. Then, in Book 4, Athene further undermined the peace by inciting the Trojan archer, Pandaros, to fire an arrow at Menelaus. This broke the truce and put the Trojans in violation of the oath. The attempt at peace has been largely forgotten since then, with Athene granting Aristeia powers to Diomedes, whose rampage dominated the story for all of Books 5 and 6. Now here we are in Book 7, when that desire for peace from Book 3 will be remembered and given one more go. If you read the scholarly literature on Book 7, you'll see some strong opinions, suggestions that it's sloppily made compared to most other books, that it doesn't align well with the rest of the text, that it leaves questions unanswered. These complaints are all true. I find at least 3 instances of inconsistent characterization in Book 7, which is extremely unusual for the Iliad. These characters are otherwise so well formed that, even though we do imagine the Iliad as being composed of various older stories, the characters are so clearly envisioned in most books of the Iliad that it's hard not to feel there are instances of late additions and edits here in Book 7. All this being said, the poor alignment, the inconsistent characterization, the unanswered questions, and the possibility that hands other than Homer's made some additions to Book 7, I'm going to ask you to go along with me in my unified theory of Book 7, which is this. Book 7 is a reflection in a smudgy mirror of Book 3. And therefore, at least some of these problems, which lead to a feeling of sloppiness in 7, are intentional. And even those problems which maybe aren't intentional still contribute to Book 7 being a smudgy mirror reflection of Book 3. In Book 7, the mortals will once again try for peace, but they will do so badly. They'll mess up here where they did things right in Book 3. But how could it even matter? Having done everything right before, the gods still derailed their peace process last time. And with 16 more books to go after this, you can't seriously think they'll succeed in achieving peace, doing things wrong, where doing things right failed. But they want to try, and we want to have this peace through dueling storyline wrapped up. That's what Book 7 will accomplish for us, as it mirrors, badly, but mostly intentionally, Book 3. Book 7 opens exactly where 6 left off. The princely Trojan brothers, Hector and Alexandros, together, walking back to battle. In fact, the opening line references Hector's statement to Alexandros at the close of Book 6, which was, "Good brother, no man that is right-minded could make light of thy doings in fight, seeing thou art strong, but thou art willfully remiss, and hast no care. And for this my heart is grieved within me, that I hear shameful words concerning thee in the Trojans' mouths, who for thy sake endure much toil. But let us be going. All this we will make good hereafter, if Zeus ever vouchsafe us to set before the heavenly gods that are for everlasting the cup of deliverance in our halls, when we have chased out of Troyland the well-grieved Achaeans." Thus, Book 7 opens now. "So spake glorious Hector, and issued from the gates, and with him went his brother Alexandros, and both were eager of soul for fight and battle. Even as God giveth to longing seamen fair wind, when they have grown weary of beating the main with polished oars, and their limbs are fordone with toil, even so appeared these to the longing Trojans." The return of their princes, Hector and Alexandros, brings joy to the Trojans, still hard at work defending their city gate. Their arrival is compared to the joy that sailors feel from a sudden new tailwind that helps them with their rowing. Then the one of them slew King Erythoos' son, Menestheus, dwelling in Arne, whom Erythoos, the mace man, and ox-eyed Philomedusa begat, and the other, even Hector, with his sharp spear, smote Ioneus' neck beneath his bronze helmet rim, and unstrung his limbs. And Glaucus, son of Hippolocus, captain of the men of Lycia, cast his spear at Ephineus through the press of battle, even at the son of Dexios, as he sprang up behind his fleet mares, and smote his shoulder. So fell he from his chariot to earth, and his limbs were unstrung. The first kill of Book 7 goes to Alexandros, who kills Menestheus, while Hector kills Ioneus. Menestheus' father is referred to as Mace Man, because he was famous for only ever fighting with an iron club. He was defeated when he was forced into a narrow canyon where he couldn't swing his club. Glaucus is here too, the Trojan ally from Lycia who met and chatted with Diomedes in Book 6. Here, Glaucus manages to kill a Greek named Iphineus, who was driving a chariot, by throwing a spear at him, knocking him clear off the chariot to fall dead on the ground. Nice shot! These 3 kills, however, are the only ones we'll see in Book 7, because things are about to take a very different turn, as the scene shifts up to Mount Olympus, where the gods are watching the return of Hector and Alexandros, and the sudden turn in favor of the Trojans their strength has brought. Now when the goddess, bright-eyed Athene, marked them making havoc of the Argives in the press of battle, she darted down from the crests of Olympus to holy Ilios. But Apollo rose to meet her, for he beheld her from Pergamos, and would have victory for the Trojans. So the twain met each the other by the oak tree. To her spake first King Apollo, son of Zeus. Why now art thou come thus eagerly from Olympus, thou daughter of great Zeus? And why hath thy high heart sent thee? Surely it is to give the Danaans unequal victory in battle, seeing thou hast no mercy on the Trojans that perish. But if thou wouldest hearken to me, and it were far better so, let us now stay battle and warring for the day. Hereafter shall they fight again, till they reach the goal of Ilios, since thus it seemeth good to your hearts, goddesses immortal, to lay waste to this city. And the goddess, bright-eyed Athene, made answer to him, So be it, far darter. In this mind I likewise came from Olympus to the midst of Trojans and Achaeans. But come, how thinkest thou to stay the battle of the warriors? And King Apollo, son of Zeus, made answer to her, Let us arouse the stalwart spirit of horse-taming Hector. If so be he will challenge some one of the Danaans in single fight, man to man, to meet him in deadly combat. So shall the bronze-greaved Achaeans be jealous, and stir up one to fight singly with goodly Hector. So spake he, and the bright-eyed goddess Athene disregarded not. From Olympus, Athene has seen the tide turning against the Greeks with the return of Hector at Alexandros, and immediately comes flying down to the battlefield. This is the impetuous valor we hear about in the context of these heroes, of which Athene is an exemplar. However, just because Athene acts quickly does not mean she's acting without thought. She is the goddess of intelligent war, and she is never without a plan. So while we might not know exactly what she has in mind, we can surmise from her sudden action two things. One, she is not happy with the Trojans successfully fighting back against the Greeks. And two, she was completely unappeased by the Trojans' offering in Book 6 of a purple robe and a promise to sacrifice some cattle later on. So what was the point of the Trojan seer Helenos' vision that made his offering so urgent? I'm honestly not sure. It provided we, the audience, with an excuse to peek inside Troy and view the lives of some of its royals, but it doesn't seem to have served any actual story purpose. Maybe we're to have imagined that Diomedes would have actually broken through the gates of Troy and led the Greek armies in an invasion, if it weren't for those offerings. It's hard to know, but we will see more of Helenos shortly, so maybe we can piece together what the author may have intended regarding his vision in Book 6. Let's put a pin in that for now and move forward. Apollo sees Athene coming from his perch upon the Trojan citadel Pergamos and meets her by the landmark oak tree of Zeus. Apollo is a bit sarcastic, saying how you and Hera are always wanting the Greeks to be winning. But Apollo offers the idea that the battle for now could be stopped, and this is interesting to her, since it might achieve her goal of protecting the Greeks without any additional trouble on her part. Athene agrees to listen to Apollo's proposal. Apollo's idea is that, by stirring up Hector into a battle rage, Apollo will get him to challenge a Greek to fight him in single combat. Then, the rest of the battle could be paused. We're suddenly back to the notion of a duel, proposed by the mortals in Book 3 and quickly derailed by the gods. But now, it's the gods proposing a duel. Notice, however, no intention on Apollo's part that this plan will result in a permanent peace. Apollo's interest here is a temporary peace. He sees the anger in Athene's eyes, her desire to destroy the city of Troy, right here and now, and he's just trying to distract Athene. The mortals, however, will remember that it was through a duel that they had hoped for a peace in Book 3. But this memory will go unspoken until near the end of Book 7. This duel is explicitly just a fight between two heroes, Hector, and whoever among the Greeks will take up his challenge. The hope for peace is faint in Book 7. By the end, we will see if even a flicker of that flame is left. Now Helenos, Priam's dear son, understood in spirit their resolve that the gods in council had approved, and he went to Hector and stood beside him, and spake a word to him. Hector, son of Priam, peer of Zeus in council, wouldst thou now hearken at all to me? For I am thy brother. Make the other Trojans sit, and all the Achaeans, and thyself challenge him that is best of the Achaeans to meet thee man to man in deadly combat. It is not yet thy destiny to die and meet thy doom, for thus heard I the voice of the gods that are from everlasting. So said he, and Hector rejoiced greatly to hear his saying, and went into the midst and refrained the battalions of the Trojans with his spear grasped by the middle, and they all sate them down, and Agamemnon made the well-grieved Achaeans sit. Helenos, the seer brother of Hector, immediately consents this decision of Athene and Apollo, that they want to pause the battle and have Hector offer to face one of the Greek heroes in single combat. This is exactly what a seer does in the ancient religion. They divine the will of the divine. Helenos really sells this idea to Hector by saying that it is not Hector's time to die. Now, you might notice that this last piece was not something we heard in the conversation between Athene and Apollo. I'm not sure if we're missing a line here, or if Helenos can just sense it's not Hector's time to die. I don't think he would purposely trick his brother. He seems to always be pretty straightforward. Anyway, this is enough for Hector to agree to the idea. The gods really didn't have to do anything to stir up Hector other than allow Helenos to listen in to their conversation using his special seer talent. And Athene withal, and Apollo of the silver bow, in the likeness of vulture birds, sate them upon a tall oak holy to Aegis-bearing Father Zeus, rejoicing in their warriors. And the ranks of all of them sate close together, bristling with shields and plumes and spears. Even as there spreadeth across the main the ripple of the west wind newly risen, and the sea grows black beneath it, so sate the ranks of Achaeans and Trojans upon the plain. And Hector spake between both hosts, Hearken to me, Trojans and well-grieved Achaeans, that I may speak what my mind within my breast biddeth me. Our oaths of truce Cronos' son, enthroned on high, accomplish not. But evil is his intent and ordinance for both our hosts, until either ye take fair-towered Troy, or yourselves be vanquished beside your seafaring ships. But in the midst of you are the chiefest of all the Achaeans. Therefore now let the man whose heart biddeth him fight with me come hither from among you all, to be your champion against goodly Hector. And this declare I, and be Zeus our witness thereto. If that man slay me with the long-edged sword, let him spoil me of my armor, and bear it to the hollow ships, but give back my body to my home, that Trojans and Trojans' wives may give me my due of burning in my death. But if I slay him, and Apollo vouchsafe me glory, I will spoil him of his armor, and bear it to holy Ilios, and hang it upon the temple of far-darting Apollo. But his corpse will I render back to the well-decked ships, that the flowing-haired Achaeans may entomb him, and build him a barrow beside wide Hellespont. So shall one say even of men that be late born, as he saileth in his benched ship over the wine-dark sea, This is the barrow of a man that died in days of old, a champion whom glorious Hector slew. So shall a man say hereafter, and this my glory shall never die. Athene and Apollo have now taken the form of vultures and perched atop that same oak of Zeus to enjoy the carnage in these appropriately grisly forms. It's not said really how the chaos of battle is paused, just that it does pause. Did Agamemnon hear over the din of battle Hector's offer of a duel? Or perhaps the seer of the Greeks, Calchas, also sensed this decision of the gods to pause for a duel and told Agamemnon to have their side to stand down. However the pause is accomplished, Greeks and Trojans both are suddenly seating themselves on the ground before Hector, who's between the two groups, who is now challenging the Greeks to send someone to fight him in a duel to the death. The stakes couldn't be any higher for Hector, or for the Greek who steps up to face him. Hector goes on to explicitly state that if he wins, he will return the body of the fallen Greek to the Greeks for proper burial rites, which would involve cremation and eventual returning of the remains to Greece for burial in the warrior's homeland. This barrow left on the Trojan plain idea Hector was talking about would be unsatisfying to the dead Greek warrior's family and would contribute too much to Hector's glory. But Hector furthermore demands the same treatment of his body by the Greeks. And for now, I'll just ask you to keep Hector's request for proper funeral rites in mind, because it becomes important much, much later in the Iliad. As a final point regarding Hector's speech, I will draw your attention to Hector presenting Helenos' idea of the duel as his own. But it was in fact the gods' idea, relayed to him via his seer brother Helenos. And I'll ask, what motivation do we think Hector has for obscuring the impetus for this sudden challenge? Does this cast doubt on the whole enterprise? If Hector is depending on and getting courage from Helenos' claim that it's not his time to die, then maybe he's intentionally omitting to mention his seer brother's involvement at all, in an attempt to lure in a Greek whom he believes must be fated to die, since he may believe that he, Hector, is not himself fated to die today. Whatever exactly Hector is up to, it's some level of sneakiness from this usually very upright guy. Will any Greek take the bait? So spake he, and they all were silent, and held their peace. To deny him they were ashamed, and feared to meet him. But at the last stood up Menelaus, and spake amid them, and chiding upbraided them, and groaned deep at heart. Ah me, vain threateners, ye women of Achaia, and no more men! Surely all this shall be a shame. Evil of evil, if no one of the Danaans now goeth to meet Hector. Nay, turn ye all to earth and water, sitting there each man disheartened, helplessly inglorious. Against him will I myself array me, and from on high the threads of victory are guided of the immortal gods. On hearing Hector's challenge, the Greeks are silent. Not a one of them is willing to face Hector alone. It's embarrassing, honestly. And this is an example of inconsistent characterization. Any of these guys would normally jump at a chance to face Hector and win glory. Is this intentional? The smudgy mirror effect? Hard to say. Finally, Menelaus stands, insults the Greeks for their cowardice, then loudly and reluctantly accepts the challenge himself. If you want something done right, you could almost hear him say, you've got to do it yourself. So spake he, and donned his fair armor. And now, O Menelaus, had the end of life appeared for thee at Hector's hands, seeing he was stronger far, but that the princes of the Achaeans started up and caught thee. And Atreus' son himself, wide-ruling Agamemnon, took him by his right hand, and spake a word, and called upon his name. Thou dost madly, Menelaus, fosterling of Zeus. Yet is it no time for this thy madness. Draw back, though it be with pain, nor think for contention's sake to fight with one better than thou, with Hector Priam's son, whom others beside thee abhor. Yea, this man even Achilles dreadeth to meet in battle, wherein is the warrior's glory, and Achilles is better far than thou. Go therefore now, and sit amid the company of thy fellows. Against him shall the Achaeans put forth another champion. Fearless though he be, and insatiate of turmoil, I ween that he shall be fain to rest his knees, if he escape from the fury of war and terrible fray. As soon as Menelaus accepts the challenge, he begins to put on his armor, and the narrator addresses Menelaus directly, as if breaking the fourth wall, or maybe speaking to Menelaus after the war. And now, O Menelaus, had the end of life appeared for thee at Hector's hands. Of course, the Iliad isn't being recited to Menelaus directly, but this is a nice touch that builds at least a little bit of tension in this moment and gives a knowing wink to the audience, who are well aware that Menelaus is among the few of the Greek heroes to make it home safely after the war. He famously had his own hero's tomb, the Menelaon, in Sparta, a really cool monument whose remains are still visible all these centuries later. Very unique architecturally. I'm kind of fascinated by it. There's a link in the show notes to an article that's rich with images. Agamemnon, protective Agamemnon, whose only good quality is his love for his brother, says, Menelaus, what are you thinking? If you fight Hector, you'll die. You will die. Even Achilles fears meeting Hector in battle. We will find someone else to face Hector. Anyone? Volunteers? How about you guys over there, wearing armor and carrying weapons? So spake the hero, and persuaded his brother's heart with just counsel, and he obeyed. So his squires thereat with gladness took his armor from his shoulders, and Nestor stood up and spake amid the Argives, Fie on it! Verily sore lamentation cometh on the land of Achaia. Verily old Peleus, driver of chariots, would groan sore, that goodly counselor of the Myrmidons and orator, who erst questioned me in his house, and rejoiced greatly, inquiring of the lineage and birth of all the Argives. If he heard now of those that all were cowering before Hector, then would he lift his hands to the immortals, instantly praying that his soul might depart from his limbs down to the house of Hades. Ah, would to Father Zeus and Athene and Apollo I were young, as when beside swift-flowing Celadon the Pylians gathered together to battle, and the Arcadians that bear the spear beneath the walls of Phia, about the streams of Dardanos. Then stood up for their champions Eurythalion, a man peer of the gods, bearing upon his shoulders the armor of King Erythoos, goodly Erythoos, that by men and fair-girdled women was surnamed the Mace Man, because he fought not with bow and long spear, but with an iron mace clave the battalions. Him Lycurgus slew by guile, and not by strength, in a narrow way, where his mace of iron saved him not from destruction. Ere that Lycurgus came on him unawares, and pierced him through the midst with his dart, and he was hurled backward upon the earth. Then Lycurgus despoiled him of his arms that brazen Ares had given him, and these himself he bare thereafter into the melee of war. But when Lycurgus grew old within his halls, he gave them to Eurythalion, his dear squire, to wear. So with his arms upon him he challenged all our best, but they trembled sore and were afraid, and no man took heart. But me my hardy spirit aroused to meet him in my confidence. Yet was I youngest in years of all. So fought I with him, and Athene vouchsafed me glory. Tallest was he, and strongest of men that I have slain. As one of huge bulk he lay spread this way and that. Would to God I were thus young, and my strength were sound. Then would Hector of the glancing helm soon find his combat. But of those of you that be chieftains of the hosts of the Achaeans, yet desireth no man of good heart to meet Hector face to face. Menelaus stands down with Agamemnon's reassurance that they would find someone else to face Hector. As we've mentioned previously, in addition to Agamemnon's personal and brotherly concern for Menelaus' safety, there's a general feeling among the Greeks that Menelaus shouldn't face undue risk. As the rightful husband of Helen, from their perspective, a huge point of this war is to restore the marriage of Menelaus and Helen. Impossible if Menelaus is dead. And no, none of them would have ever considered asking Helen her thoughts on the matter. It was a real blind spot in their culture that led to the real suffering of real women, not just among fictional characters like these. Seeing this lack of volunteers to face Hector's challenge, Nestor stands and gives a rambling old man speech, seemingly as per usual, but he's being a little sneaky here. There's a purpose in his rambling. He's going to catch them off guard with his doddering rant, and then lure them in with what they could obtain if they have the courage to stand and face Hector. Nestor starts by reminding them all that he discussed all their family histories with Achilles' father, Peleus. The implication is that Peleus had been asking to get a sense of what kind of men would be his son's companions in this war, and that Nestor had sold Peleus on them all based on what upright and courageous men from good families they were. Apparently not all that courageous, it would seem, now that none of them is willing to face Hector in single combat. This instills a sense of shame in the men, without insulting any of them directly. Then Nestor goes on for a while regretting that he's too old to face Hector himself, and ends up telling a story about a time when he faced a particularly large opponent and won glory for himself. Nestor gives way more details than we might feel necessary about how this opponent had won the armor that he had worn into battle against Nestor. But of course, for loot-seeking Greek heroes listening to him, these details about the value of this armor are an enticement. Nestor concludes with a lament that none of these Greek heroes of today are interested in defeating a particularly large opponent like Hector and winning his valuable armor. No, of course you guys aren't interested in that. So the old man upbraided them, and there stood up 9 in all. Far first arose Agamemnon, king of men, and after him rose Tydeus' son, stalwart Diomedes, and after them the Iantes, clothed with impetuous might, and after them Idomeneus, and Idomeneus' brother-in-arms, Meriones, peer of the war god, slayer of men. And after them, Eurypylos, Euaemon's glorious son. And up rose Thoas, Andraemon's son, and goodly Odysseus. So all these were fain to fight with goodly Hector. And among them spake again knightly Nestor of Gerenia. Now cast ye the lot from the first unto the last, for him that shall be chosen. For he shall in truth profit the well-grieved Achaeans, yea, and he shall have profit of his own soul, if he escape from the fury of war and terrible fray. So said he, and they marked each man his lot, and cast them in the helmet of Agamemnon, Atreus' son. And the hosts prayed, and lifted up their hands to the gods. And thus would one say, looking up to wide heaven, O Father Zeus, vouchsafe that the lot fall upon Aias or Tydeus' son, or else on the king of Mycenae, rich in gold. Nestor's speech pays off big time, with 9 of the top Greek heroes standing to face Hector, Agamemnon, Diomedes, both Aiases, Idomeneus, Meriones, Eurypylos, Thoas, and Odysseus. Nestor now takes charge of how they'll determine who from among this sudden excess of volunteers will actually fight Hector. I have no doubt he expected this outcome all along and was ready with this next step. They're going to cast lots for the opportunity. Each of the 9 volunteers will place their lot into a helmet. Likely these lots are just broken pieces of pottery with a mark such as a letter or 2 of their name written on it. Each of the 9 men then marked their lots and placed them into the helmet, and the men were praying to Zeus for various different men to be selected, whoever they believed stood the best chance to win against Hector, with Aias the Greater, Diomedes, and Agamemnon mentioned specifically as heroes the army hoped would be selected. There's of course a religious component here. Selection by lots would not have been seen as a mathematical random selection to them, but rather as the active choice of Zeus. Recently, I was reading Carl Jung's Modern Man in Search of a Soul, and came across his juxtaposition of how archaic and modern people explain chance events. Jung wrote that we dismiss chance as maybe somewhat annoying, maybe something meaningless, but certainly an isolated event that has escaped our efforts to assign a natural cause to it. But Jung wrote that archaic people don't even recognize chance events, because to them, everything is brought about by invisible, arbitrary forces. In other words, that everything is chance. There are no natural causes of events because all events are caused supernaturally. The will of Zeus is manifested all around us all the time in the ancient way of seeing the world. Lightning didn't strike your house because it was the tallest object in the midst of a storm. No, it's because you offended Zeus in some way. Think about what you've been up to lately, and you'll discover your mistake. In the case of a lot about to be shaken out of the helmet in Nestor's hands, it will not be a chance appearance of a particular man's initial written on a broken piece of pottery, but Zeus himself indicating which Greek he wants to see fight Hector in a duel. So spake they, and knightly Nestor of Gerenia shook the helmet, and there leapt forth the lot that themselves desired, even the lot of Aias. The herald bare it everywhither through the throng, showing it from right to left to all the princes of the Achaeans, but they knew it not, and every man denied it. But when he came, bearing it everywhither through the throng, to him that had marked it, and cast it in the helm, even glorious Aias, then he held forth his hand, and the herald stood by him and put it therein. And Aias saw and knew the token upon the lot, and rejoiced in heart. He cast it by his foot upon the earth, and spake, My friends, verily the lot is mine, yea, and myself am glad at heart, because I deem that I shall vanquish goodly Hector. But come now, while I clothe me in my armor of battle, pray ye the while to Cronos' son, King Zeus, in silence to yourselves, that the Trojans hear you not. Nay, rather openly if ye will, for we will have no fear of any man soever. For none by force shall chase me, he willing me unwilling, neither by skill, seeing not so skillless, meseemeth, was I born in Salamis, nor nurtured. So said he, and they prayed to Cronos' son, King Zeus, and thus would one speak, looking up to wide heaven. O Father Zeus, that rulest from Ida, most glorious, most great, vouchsafe to Aias victory, and the winning of great glory. But if thou so lovest Hector indeed, and carest for him, grant unto either equal prowess and renown. Nestor shakes the helmet so that one lot jumps out. The herald, possibly Talthybios, but his name isn't given here, goes around showing it to the men, each of whom denies it being his, until he reaches Aias the Greater, who claims it as his. Telamonian Aias is a favorite, someone many of them had been hoping and praying would win. Multiple times throughout the Iliad, Telamonian Aias is referred to as the second best of the Greeks, after Achilles, and the best now that Achilles has taken himself out of the action. The original audience would have been highly aware of this, and it's why the Greek characters on the field are so excited that his lot has been selected by Zeus, as was their belief about random events not actually being random. Furthermore, in addition to being the second best, Aias is also referred to as the bulwark, or primary defender of the Greeks, multiple times in the Iliad, up through Book 7. He's their wall in battle. However, Book 7 is the last time Aias is given the name bulwark in the Iliad. Why? Stay tuned. The Great Wall, the defense of the Greeks, is a primary theme of Book 7. Aias joyfully accepts and advises the Greeks to pray to Zeus silently so the Trojans can't hear them while he gears up for the fight. Then Aias immediately backtracks and says they can just as well pray out loud because we don't fear the Trojans. This is a weird thing for him to have said, this backtracking, and there's been some active debate in the scholarly community about what the author is trying to convey. A fairly recently discovered piece of papyrus dating to the late 3rd or early 4th century CE omits the second part of Aias's prayer entirely, the part to pray out loud for all I care, lending support to those scholars who suggest it was a later and clumsy addition. I'm not getting the impression that there is a consensus among scholars on just what is intended here. There's one interpretation that to hear a prayer might lead to the enemy making an opposing counter-prayer. This might make some sense if Aias at first fears counter-prayers, but then decides that the gods would only tip the balance of a fight whose outcome is in doubt, and he suddenly backtracks upon realizing he wants to project confidence and the idea that his victory couldn't possibly be in doubt. And this explanation may make sense. Keep in mind that this entire section, including the casting of lots and the conversation afterward, is happening on the battlefield with the Trojans present. Other theories go farther afield. The same Walter Leaf, who is one of the translators of this edition of the Iliad we're reading here, has a commentary where he gets into the secret names of gods and the notion that national divinities' names are closely guarded within a community. But this seems off track in the world of the Iliad, in which there is very definitely only the one set of gods whom all nations recognize and are impacted by. While I don't think we'll get a clear understanding of the theological implications at play here, what I think Aias's backtracking does do for us is drop just a little seed of doubt, both in Aias's confidence in himself and for us as to the outcome. And by reminding us of the role of the gods in a duel like we're about to witness, it calls to mind the previous instance of a duel in the Iliad back in Book 3, when Paris and Menelaus faced each other. I mentioned the comparison to Book 3 in the opening of this episode, and it bears repeating here. The Book 3 duel was sanctified with all the proper rituals. Agamemnon and Priam oversaw an animal sacrifice and swore oaths for all their men to adhere to a truce and to the results of the duel. Here we have only the informal prayers of Nestor and the various men, and a prayer by Aias in which his backtracking seems to downplay even the role of prayer in this duel. These are highlighted differences between these two duels, drawing attention to the negligence of the Greeks toward their religious duties here in Book 7. Let's keep this difference in mind for the end of Book 7, in which the Greeks will continue to be negligent toward the gods in a very different context, but with a similar outcome. In the nearer term, I'm going to draw your attention to one more weirdness, the prayer the Greeks in general make at the very end of this last passage, once they know it's Aias who will face Hector. The Greeks, praying to Zeus, acknowledge that if Zeus loves Hector, then they ask Zeus to grant both Aias and Hector equal prowess and renown in the upcoming duel. Why would they do this? I do not know. This is deeply weird. However, author James Morrison, in his paper analyzing the prayers in the works of Homer, points out that there are consistent patterns in Homeric prayers. And while these prayers here in Book 7 are weird in various ways, they largely do comply to the forms that he's analyzed and to the expectation of a divine response. So let's continue. So said they, while Aias arrayed him in flashing bronze. And when he had now clothed upon his flesh all his armor, then marched he, as huge Ares coming forth, when he goeth to battle amid heroes whom Cronos' son setteth to fight in fury of heart-consuming strife. So rose up huge Aias, bulwark of the Achaeans, with a smile on his grim face. And he went with long strides of his feet beneath him, shaking his far-shadowing spear. Then, moreover, the Argives rejoiced to look upon him, but sore trembling came upon the Trojans, on the limbs of every man, and Hector's own heart beat within his breast. But in no wise could he now flee, nor shrink back into the throng of the host, seeing he had challenged him to battle. And Aias came near, bearing his tower-like shield of bronze, with sevenfold oxhide, that Tychios had wrought him cunningly. Tychios, far best of couriers, that had his home in Hyle, who made him his glancing shield, of sevenfold hides of stalwart bulls, and overlaid the seven with bronze. Aias gets geared up for battle, and he is compared to the god Ares. This is a dramatic approach to the fight. The description here is wonderful. The smile on his grim face, his approach with long strides, shaking his spear. The camera is panning up and down this mountain of a man. You can almost hear the triumphant music, trumpets blaring, the rumbling of foreboding drums. The Trojans are getting scared. Hector is getting scared. He feels his heart pounding in his chest, seeing this giant warrior who's about to face him in the duel that he initiated. What was I thinking? This is also one of the best looks we get at the unique shield that Aias the Greater carries, commonly referred to in many translations as a tower shield, so called because it's long and tall. It could provide protection for a whole body, and at times Aias' half-brother Teucros will hide behind the shield, firing arrows under Aias' protection. This tower-like shield was made of bronze and 7 layers of oxhide by Tychios, a man from the town of Hyle in Boeotia, who was a courier, that's someone who tanned leather. This might not be quite what we're expecting, that a shield would have been made mostly with leather and not primarily of metal. It would have been treated by Tychios to be fairly hard and well preserved, but the sound of a sword or spear hitting it would have been more of a clunk or thump sound than the clang we'd expect. We can either picture the shield as a long rectangle, which is how it's often portrayed in artwork, or think of it as being a figure 8, which is probably more accurate to how such shields were shaped in ancient times, being the length of an oxhide stretched across a framework. Aias isn't the only warrior described as having this type of shield. Achilles carries one, or he will once we finally see him in battle, and recently in Book 6 we saw Hector carrying one as well. You should imagine most shields, however, as being smaller and round, unless it is otherwise specified as being a tower shield. In the original Greek text of the Iliad, there are 2 words for shield: opsis, the small round ones, and sakos, the tower shields. I've linked to an article in the show notes titled The Unbreakable Shield, Thematics of Sakos and Opsis by Natasha Bershadsky, which goes into so very much more detail about the shields, their appearances, their meanings, and stats on which kinds of shields result in better protection. It's all so fascinating. I can feel myself getting distracted, and I'm reminding myself to get back on track. But how exciting is this? 2 of the major heroes of the Iliad are about to fight, and they're starting things off with some trash talk. I'm back in. The threat of distraction by shield stats is allayed. Let's listen in. This shield bare Telamonian Aias before his breast, and stood near to Hector, and spake to him, threatening. Hector, now verily shalt thou well know, man to man, what manner of princes the Danaans likewise have among them, even after Achilles, cleaver of the ranks of men, the lion-hearted. But he, amid his beaked, seafaring ships, lieth in sore wrath with Agamemnon, shepherd of the host. Yet are we such as to face thee, yea, and many of us. But make thou beginning of war and battle. Ooh! Aias is trash-talking Hector. He's saying, you're about to learn, buddy, what kind of men the Greeks are. Maybe you think Achilles is the only great warrior among us. Wrong. I'm tough too, and there's a lot more of us. Yeah, I spent a little too long talking about how Achilles is off pouting, and not enough about how tough I am, but that's my trash-talking. What you got? Aias, that was way too much about Achilles. After all the work I went to building you up, that was disappointing. Hope you fight better than you speak. What does Hector have to say? And great Hector of the glancing helm answered him, Aias of the seed of Zeus, son of Telamon, chieftain of the host, tempt not thou me like some puny boy or woman that knoweth not deeds of battle. But I well know wars and slaughterings. To right know I, to left know I the wielding of my tough targe. Therein I deem is stalwart soldiership. And I know how to charge into the melee of fleet chariots, and how in close battle to join in furious Ares' revel. Howbeit, I have no mind to smite thee, being such an one as thou art, by spying thee unawares, but rather openly, if perchance I may hit thee. Hector responds by saying, Don't bother trying to frighten me. I'm experienced in battle myself, and I'm not going to try any tricks with you. I'll attack you openly. And this may be a subtle jab at Aias' backtracking during the prayers, when he'd first told the Greeks to pray silently, then maybe remembering that the Trojans were listening in, went back and said he wasn't afraid of anyone, so pray openly to Zeus, guys. Hector poised his far shadowy spear, and hurled and smote Aias' dread shield of sevenfold hide upon the uttermost bronze, the 8th layer that was thereon. Through 6 folds went the stubborn bronze cleaving, but in the 7th hide it stayed. And with that, Hector cast his spear at Aias. No mention of lots for who gets to cast first in this duel. This is another way in which this duel dispenses with the proper formalities of the previous one. Hector's spear slams into and through that great tower shield of Aias, piercing all 7 layers of oxhide, only being stopped by the 8th and final layer made of bronze. Thanks, Tychios, for including some actual metal in the shield you made, or this would have been a short fight. Then heaven-sprung Aias hurled next his far shadowy spear, and smote upon the circle of the shield of Priam's son. Through the bright shield passed the violent spear, and through the curiously wrought corslet pressed it on, and straight forth beside the flank the spear rent his doublet, but he swerved aside and escaped black death. Now it's Aias' turn. He winds up and casts his spear. It slams into and right through Hector's little round Opsis shield, through Hector's armor, and even tears a hole in Hector's clothing. Wow! It was only a last-minute turn that saved Hector. The old last-minute turn trick. Wily. Then both together with their hands plucked forth their long spears and fell to like ravening lions or wild boars, whose might is no wise feeble. Then Priam's son smote the shield's midst with his dart, but the bronze brake not through, for the point turned back. But Aias leapt on him and pierced his buckler, and straight through went the spear, and staggered him in his onset, and cleft its way unto his neck, so that the dark blood gushed up. Yet even then did not Hector of the glancing helm cease from fight, but yielded ground, and with stout hand seized a stone lying upon the plain, black and rugged and great. Therewith hurled he, and smote Aias' dread shield of sevenfold oxhide in the midst upon the boss, and the bronze resounded. Next Aias lifted a far greater stone, and swung and hurled it, putting might immeasurable therein. So smote he the buckler, and burst it inwards with the rock like unto a millstone, and beat down his knees, and he was stretched upon his back, pressed into his shield. But Apollo straightway raised him up. And now they had been smiting hand to hand with swords, but that the heralds, messengers of gods and men, came, one from the Trojans, one from the mail-clad Achaeans, even Talthybios and Idaeus, both men discreet. Between the two held they their staves, and herald Idaeus spake a word, being skilled in wise counsel. Fight ye no more, dear sons, neither do battle, seeing Zeus the cloud-gatherer loveth you both. And both are men of war, that verily know we all. But night already is upon us. It is well with all to obey the hest of night. So then it became a free-for-all. Each man yanked his spear out of whatever other than his opponent's body it had lodged into, and they tore into each other. Hector strikes, and his spear's bronze point hits the center of Aias' shield, but it's turned back. I'm imagining a boss or raised metal center to the otherwise mostly leather shield. And Aias immediately responds, his spear breaking clear through Hector's shield. And this is the second time in as many attacks that Aias breaks through Hector's shield, which must be in shreds by now. Having broken clean through that shield, Aias' spear wounds Hector's neck, and blood is gushing out. But this does not stop Hector, who one-handed picks up and lobs a huge stone at Aias. This stone throw, however, is stopped by that famous shield, which in this line is now specified to have a bronze boss, which is said to resound with the crash of the mighty stone upon it. Note the superlative nature of Aias' shield in this fight, the dominance of defensive power. This is a theme of Book 7 that we'll continue to revisit. Now Aias heaves an even bigger rock, which smashes Hector's shield to bits and throws Hector first down to his knees. And then from the staggering weight of this enormous stone, Hector is crushed underneath, on his back, upon the ground. I'll note that if you look around the site of Troy on Google Earth, the plains to the west of the ancient city, where I imagine these battles to have taken place, there don't seem to be a lot of stones lying around there. It's a grassy land of pastures and low hills. Maybe the heroes of ancient times heaved all the stones away. Anyway, Hector is pinned down upon the ground, held down by this huge stone. Victory for Aias seems assured, until Apollo intervenes, quickly putting Hector back on his feet. So now the battle is about to continue again. The two have swords in hands when suddenly the heralds from both camps show up and call for a halt to the duel. Who sent for these guys? And why? I thought we'd agreed that this was a fight to the death. The heralds say that clearly both men are loved by Zeus, and besides, it's nighttime, so end the fight. Hey, remember that weird prayer? Not the first one Aias made, but rather the one that all the Greeks made, asking Zeus to give both combatants equal prowess and renown, instead of asking for Zeus to let their guy win? It seemed, at the time, like they were being way too considerate of Zeus's opinion in the matter. Well, their wishes come true. Despite having dominated the fight all along, Aias is not the victor, and this has not been a fight to the death. Sudden ending, sudden, inexplicable ending. Then Telamonian Aias answered him and said, Idaeus, bid ye Hector to speak those words. Of his own self he challenged to combat all our best. Let him be first, and I will surely follow as he saith. Aias replies to the Trojan herald Idaeus, deferring to Hector's preference in whether to conclude the duel, since Hector had issued the challenge. Then great Hector of the glancing helm said to him, Aias, seeing God gave thee stature and might and wisdom, and with the spear thou art excellent above all the Achaeans, let us now cease from combat and battle for the day. But hereafter will we fight until God judge between us, giving to one of us the victory. But night already is upon us. It is very well withal to obey the hest of the night, so that thou mayest rejoice all the Achaeans beside their ships, and chiefly the kinsmen and fellows that are thine. And I, throughout the great city of King Priam, will rejoice the Trojan men and Trojan dames with trailing robes, that with prayer, I ween, will enter the holy assemblage. But come, let us give each the other famous gifts, that men may thus say, Achaeans and Trojans alike. These, having fought for the sake of heart-consuming strife, parted again, reconciled in friendship. So said he, and gave him his silver-studded sword, with scabbard and well-cut baldric, and Aias gave his belt bright with purple. So they parted, and one went to the Achaean host, and one betook him to the throng of Trojans. And these rejoiced to behold him come to them alive and sound, escaped from the fury of Aias, and his hands unapproachable, and they brought him to the city, saved beyond their hope. And Aias on their side, the well-grieved Achaeans, brought to noble Agamemnon, exulting in his victory. Hector responds directly to Aias, complimenting him on his skills, and agreeing that they should break for the night, but with the notion that they will resume this duel in the future. Hector says that Aias can enjoy the time with his comrades and kin, and that he will do the same. Everyone's just fine with this having been all for what? A little show? An exhibition event? Hector proposes that they exchange gifts now, which is a very formal and important ritual among noblemen of the time. Hector gives Aias a silver-studded sword with matching scabbard and sword belt. Aias gives him a sash dyed purple. And before you think that these gifts are tremendously unequal, keep in mind that the purple dye used in the ancient Mediterranean was an incredibly valuable product, worth far more than gold by weight, and so valued that at various times and places it was literally illegal for someone not of the noble class to own anything dyed purple. The dye was produced from a species of sea snail called the murex, and it was a costly, time-consuming, laborious process that has only recently been recreated. So in this instance, I think the gifts are considered of roughly equal value. And that's what the Greeks had asked Zeus for, after all, that Aias and Hector would end up with equal outcomes in the duel. They got what they wished for. If only they wished for smarter wishing, Troy would have 0 major heroes now, instead of the one that's been keeping their entire invasion at bay for a decade now. The men part, and we now follow Aias and the Greeks back to the Greek camp, where they all gather at Agamemnon's place. So when these were come unto the huts of Atrides, then did Agamemnon, king of men, slay them an ox, a male of 5 years old, for the most mighty son of Cronos. This they flayed and made ready, and divided it all, and minced it cunningly, and pierced it through with spits, and roasted it carefully, and drew all off again. Then as soon as they had rest from the task, and had made ready the meal, they began the feast, nor was their soul aught stinted of the equal banquet. And the hero son of Atreus, wide-ruling Agamemnon, gave to Aias slices of the kinds full length for his honor. The men prepare a feast. This is, of course, just the noblemen. There aren't any names mentioned other than Agamemnon himself and Aias, and shortly we'll hear from Nestor, but we can imagine all the big names are here: Diomedes, Odysseus, Idomeneus, and so on. Agamemnon, as the leader, is providing this feast out of his largesse, and by joining him for it, the others are acknowledging his supremacy as the high king among the kings. And as is the case in nearly 100% of the times that food is mentioned in the Iliad, it's only meat that's being served. One time, a single onion gets mentioned, I think. So being a vegetarian back then would have been tough. In honor of his fight against Hector, Agamemnon gives Aias the finest cut of the meat, which apparently was felt to be the chine or backbone. Barbecue ribs, nice. Good job, Aias. I mean, you could have tried winning, but whatever. Your comrades didn't even pray for you to actually win. So maybe blame them. And when they had put from them the desire of meat and drink, then first the old man began to weave the web of counsel, even Nestor, whose reed of old time was proved most excellent. He of good intent made harangue among them, and said, Son of Atreus, and ye other princes of the Achaeans, seeing that many flowing-haired Achaeans are dead, and keen Ares hath spilt their dusky blood about fair-flowing Scamandros, and their souls have gone down to the house of Hades. Therefore, it behoveth thee to make the battle of the Achaeans cease with daybreak, and we will assemble to wheel hither the corpses with oxen and mules. So let us burn them a little ways from the ships, that each man may bear their bones home to their children, whene'er we return again to our native land. And let us heap one barrow about the pyre, rearing it from the plain for all alike, and thereto build with speed high towers, a bulwark for our ships and for ourselves. In the midst thereof let us make gates well compact, that through them may be a way for chariot driving. And without let us dig a deep fosse hard by, to be about it and to hinder horses and footmen, lest the battle of the proud Trojans be heavy on us hereafter. So spake he, and all the chiefs gave assent. So after the feast, Nestor has addressed the men, and he's got a plan. His plan is really twofold. One, Nestor wants them to gather up the bodies of all their dead and cremate them, so that the men of each Greek city can then collect the bones of their own dead to be returned to their homeland and their children, eventually. It was very important to the ancient Greeks to be buried in their home city. But the second and more consequential part of Nestor's plan is that they should build a wall, a defensive structure to protect their camp and ships. So here's where the defensive theme of Book 7 comes back. First, the focus on Telamonian Aias as the bulwark, the great defender with his great shield, and now a wall. Nestor proposes that this wall should also have a ditch in front of it, which would, of course, have the effect of making the wall relatively higher from the perspective of the Trojans outside it. He also wants defensive towers and gates wide enough for them to drive their chariots out from. And while he doesn't mention the spikes, when they build this wall and ditch, they're going to add spikes into the ditch to make men and horses scared to approach it for fear of being impaled. The Greek leaders all agree, And before we can get into the logistics of how they're going to accomplish all this construction, the scene shifts to Troy. But meanwhile was in the high town of Ilios an assembly of the Trojans, fierce, confused, beside Priam's gate. To them discreet Antenor began to make harangue. Hearken to me, Trojans and Dardanians and allies, that I may tell you that my soul within my breast commandeth me. Lo, go to now, let us give Helen of Argos and the wealth with her for the sons of Atreus to take away. Now fight we in guilt, against the oaths of faith. Therefore is there no profit for us that I hope to see fulfilled, unless we do thus. So meanwhile in Troy, the Trojan leaders are also discussing what's next. Antenor is speaking. He is an elder of Troy, married to the priestess Theano, whom we encountered in Book 6, when she opened the temple of Athene to the women of Troy. Antenor has a pragmatic but controversial proposal. He wants to give the Greeks back Helen and all her possessions. She's why the Greeks are here. She's why our city is under siege. Her continued presence within our walls is endangering our freedom, our families, and our lives. And, very importantly, Antenor calls back to that previous duel in Book 3, when the Trojans and Greeks had made all the proper rituals to sanctify the proceedings, and had sworn oaths to suspend hostilities, to let Paris and Menelaus fight a duel, and to abide by the results of that contest. But what had happened then? A Trojan had broken their oath. Pandaros had fired an arrow at Menelaus, breaking the peace and their oath. Antenor says that they are now fighting with forsworn oaths. Because of this, they are in the wrong now, and there is no hope for their success in this war. There is no hope for peace. Heaven will hold them to their oath, to their deaths. So we're back to the peace process, those oaths from Book 3 and the faint hope for peace they contain. If Antenor's proposal is accepted, first by his fellow Trojans, and then by the Greeks, it's maybe just barely possible to get the peace process going again. They'll make good on their oaths. They'll have dealt with the reason for the Greek invasion in the first place, and Troy could potentially survive if they follow Antenor's plan. If not, the oaths the Trojans swore and broke will guarantee that war and their eventual deaths are inevitable. How will the other Trojan leaders respond to Antenor's proposal to return Helen and her treasure? So spake he, and sate him down. And there stood up among them noble Alexander, lord of Helen, beautiful-haired. He made him answer, and spake winged words. Antenor, these words from thee are no longer to my pleasure. Yet thou hast it in thee to devise other sayings more excellent than this. But if indeed thou sayest this in earnest, then verily the gods themselves have destroyed thy wit. But I will speak forth amid the horse-taming Trojans, and declare outright, my wife will I not give back, but the wealth I brought from Argos to our home, and all that I have a mind to give, and add more of mine own substance. So spake he, and sate him down. Not well. The other Trojans do not respond well to Antenor's proposal, and specifically Helen's new guy, Alexandros, does not like what he's hearing. Of course Alexandros doesn't like what Antenor is saying. He doesn't want to give back Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. Alexandros refuses to give back Helen. But he does say that he's willing to give up all the possessions of hers that he took and to add to them from what he already owns. So this is another attempt to end the war on the part of the mortals, another way in which Book 7 is a reflection of Book 3. But it is a poor reflection, a smudgy mirror. How can the Greeks be satisfied with only Helen's treasure when it is Helen herself, and specifically Helen's marriage to Menelaus, which their oaths have bound them to protect, and sent them across the sea for this, now 10-year-long war? There stood up among them Priam of the seed of Dardanos, the peer of gods in council. He of good intent made harangue to them, and said, Hearken to me, Trojans and Dardanians and allies, that I may tell you that my soul within my breast commandeth me. Now eat your supper throughout the city as of old, and take thought to keep watch, and be wakeful every man. And at dawn let Idaeus fare to the hollow ships, to tell Atreus' sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus, the sayings of Alexandros, for whose sake strife is come about, and likewise to ask them this wise word, whether they are minded to refrain from noisy war till we have burned our dead. Afterwards we will fight again. till heaven part us and give one or other victory. So spake he, and they hearkened diligently to him and obeyed. Then took they their supper throughout the host by ranks. Priam agrees with Alexandros. We'll offer the treasure, but we will not offer Helen. Priam is always going to agree with Alexandros, by the way. He's the enabling old parent, the doting father, so completely besotted with his own prodigal son that he can't bring himself to correct his son, even though there are times, like in Book 3, when he verbally acknowledges Alexandros' flaws. In addition to agreeing with Alexandros' proposal to offer the Greeks the return of Helen's treasure, plus additional treasure from Alexandros' own store, Priam adds that he wants a truce also for the opportunity for the Trojans to collect and bury their dead from the battlefield. So both sides have independently come up with the notion that now is the time for a funeral, after the battles of the recent few books. So we can be confident there will at least be a temporary truce, with the possibility for a complete resolution to the war, if the Greeks are willing to accept Alexandros' offer. Priam says that for the moment, everyone is to enjoy their dinner, but keep a good lookout on the city, and in the morning he'll send his herald to Agamemnon and Menelaus to see if they're willing to accept this plan for a temporary truce, and possibly a full and permanent settlement to the war. At dawn, Idaeus fared to the hollow ships. He found the Danaans in assembly, the men of Ares' company, beside the stern of Agamemnon's ship. And so the loud-voiced herald stood in their midst and said unto them, Atreides, and ye other princes of the Achaeans, Priam and all the noble Trojans bade me tell you, if perchance it might find favor and acceptance with you, the saying of Alexandros, for whose sake strife hath come about, the wealth that Alexandros brought in his hollow ships to Troy. Would that he had perished first. All that he hath a mind to give, and to add more thereto of his substance. But the wedded wife of glorious Menelaus he saith he will not give. Yet verily the Trojans do bid him do it. Moreover, they bade me ask this thing of you, whether ye are minded to refrain from noisy war until we have burned our dead. Afterwards we will fight again, till heaven part us and give one or other victory. So said he, and they all kept silence and were still. So in the morning, the Trojan herald Idaeus has gone to the Greek camp and presented the Greeks with the offer that Priam and Alexandros have made, along with his own little unasked-for wish that Alexandros had died before he'd committed his crimes against the Greeks. That's a little mouthier than I'd want my herald to be, personally, bad-mouthing my son in front of my enemies. Note that Idaeus is addressing not only Agamemnon and Menelaus, as he'd been instructed to, but also all the princes of the Achaeans. So he's speaking to all the noblemen, which again, I haven't read a herald job description, but I suspect he's not living up to it here. Maybe he needs a performance improvement plan. Idaeus specifies that Helen is not included in this offer, so he got that part right. And then he makes the secondary proposal for a temporary truce to collect the remains of the dead. How will the Greeks respond? But at the last spake Diomedes of the loud war cry in their midst. Let no man now accept Alexandros' substance, neither Helen's self, known is it, even to him that hath no wit at all, how that the issues of destruction hang already over the Trojans. So spake he, and all the sons of the Achaeans shouted, applauding the saying of horse-taming Diomedes. And then Lord Agamemnon spake to Idaeus. Idaeus, thyself thou hearest the saying of the Achaeans, how they answer thee, and the like seemeth good to me. But as concerning the dead, I grudge you not to burn them, for dead corpses is there no stinting, when once they are dead, of the swift propitiation of fire. And for the oaths let Zeus be witness, the loud thundering lord of Hera. So saying, he lifted up his scepter in the sight of all the gods, and Idaeus departed back to holy Ilios. Now the Trojans and Dardanians sate in assembly, gathered all together to wait till Idaeus should come. And he came and stood in their midst, and declared his message. Then they made them ready very swiftly for either task, some to bring the dead, and some to seek for wood. And on their part the Argives hasted from their well-decked ships, some to bring the dead, and some to seek for wood. Remember when Priam told Idaeus to present their offers specifically to Agamemnon and Menelaus? And then Idaeus didn't do that? Before either Agamemnon or Menelaus can respond, young Diomedes stands up and demands that they not accept the Trojans' offer, not even if Helen were to be included. Diomedes is reading in the Trojans' offer an indication that they are feeling vulnerable. Because of this, Diomedes believes that victory for the Greeks must be at hand. The Greeks all cheer their approval of Diomedes, and Agamemnon rejects the Trojan offer of full settlement in exchange for treasure, but accepts the temporary truce for the burial of the dead. Agamemnon raises his scepter for the gods to see and witness this truce, and the herald returns to Troy. Mission accomplished. Heck of a job, Idaeus. Both sides will now silently proceed to the plains of Troy at sunrise to collect their dead. Now the sun was newly beating on the fields as he climbed heaven from the deep stream of gently flowing ocean, when both sides met together. Then it was a hard matter to know each man again, but they washed them with water clean of clotted gore, and with shedding of hot tears lifted them upon the wains. But great Priam bade them not wail aloud, so in silence heaped they the corpses on the pyre, stricken at heart, and when they had burned them with fire, departed to holy Ilios. And in like manner on their sides, the well-grieved Achaeans heaped the corpses on the pyre, stricken at heart, and when they had burned them with fire, departed to the hollow ships. The dead of each side are found by their comrades, washed clean with water from the sacred river Scamander, and transported on wagons back to their respective sides of the field, where each side, Greek and Trojan, builds a funeral pyre which lasts until the night. And when day was not yet, but still twilight of the night, then was the chosen folk of the Achaeans gathered together around the pyre, and made one barrow about it, rearing it from the plain for all alike. And thereto built they a wall and lofty towers, a bulwark for their ships and for themselves. In the midst thereof made they gates well compacted, that through them might be a way for chariot driving. And without they dug a deep fosse beside it, broad and great, and planted a palisade therein. During the night, the Greeks' funeral pyre dies down, and they shovel earth upon it to make a burial mound. This, we should assume, is a temporary burial for their fallen. The proper funeral rites have been observed, and so these men's spirits can proceed to the underworld. But ultimately the Greeks' goal is to defeat Troy, then return home with the remains of their dead for permanent burial in Greece. Near this burial mound, the Greeks now, this same night, begin work on Nestor's proposed fortifications. Now, the Wall of Nestor is a strange thing, and worth a closer look. First off, the geography doesn't make a lot of sense if you're envisioning the Greek camp the way I did my first few times through the Iliad. I've included a link to a really useful map in the show notes. It's under Resources, Item 1, titled Geology Corresponds with Homer's Description of Ancient Troy. I'd been envisioning the Greek ships pulled up onto a beach that itself was then open to the plains leading to Troy. But this is only one of two ways to envision the camp, beach, and wall. That's the way the geography of Troy looks now. A long beach rising up to a plain of rolling hills, bisected by the Scamander River, whose modern name is the Karamandaris, the plain rising eventually to the hill upon which the city was built. A wall would therefore have to go the whole length of the beach, curving around that entire stretch, and building such a long wall would be a monumental task. Such a wall certainly couldn't be built in a single night, as depicted here. But the landscape around Troy has changed in the past 3,000 years. The river has silted up the plain and changed the geography, especially right around where we're supposed to imagine the Greek landing beach and camp to have been. In ancient times, this beach was a sand spit, a little peninsula with the Mediterranean Sea on one side and the sheltered harbor of Troy on the other. This sheltered harbor and sand spit no longer exists. The river has silted up its own mouth so that it is now even with the coastline. In ancient times, that sand spit only connected to the plain at its southern end, meaning we can imagine the Greek camp as having been entirely upon a little peninsula. So the wall the Greeks are building this night would only have to have been as long as this sand spit peninsula was wide. This would have been a much more realistic proposal for a single night's work, despite all of Nestor's talk of towers and gates in a ditch. This is a fairly simple way of imagining what's happening right now. A wall being built across the point where a narrow peninsula meets the main body of the land. and envisioning the wall and the camp geography this way will help you follow the action in many of the upcoming books. I say envisioning the geography this way will help in many of the upcoming books, but not all of them, because unfortunately the wall and the geography around it is just not that simple. Nothing about this wall is simple. You know how I say in the introduction to each episode of this series that the Iliad comes to us from the depths of time? It was ancient to the ancients, who collected it from among even older stories and compiled it into the version we have. It's with the wall, more so than any other element, that the compilation of the Iliad from older stories becomes apparent. There has been so much scholarship about the wall. So many experts have written so much. They've all been trying to figure out why the wall, as it will appear in the whole rest of the Iliad, can possibly make sense. The problems might not be apparent to you yet, but just start by asking yourself, why are the Greeks, only now, 10 years into the war, building a wall? And doing so at a juncture where, as Diomedes has pointed out and the other leaders all agree, the Greeks feel assured that victory is now at hand. So already, before it's even been built, the wall doesn't make sense to us. But there will be more, so many more problems with it. What about this simple geographic interpretation I made for you about the sand-spit peninsula and the wall across its narrow width? There will be times in the upcoming books when this way of envisioning the wall will correspond to the descriptions in the text, and other times when it just won't. And you'll be forced to imagine a wall that extends around a full length of beach ships. But even these two problems, the problematic timing of the wall's construction and its configuration, don't exhaust our challenges with accepting the wall. Because we're about to witness a scene between two of the gods and their conversation about the wall, and the lack of proper religious observation by the Greeks here in Book 7, which will make our understanding of the wall even more complicated. So let's hear what Zeus and Poseidon have to say. Thus toiled the flowing-haired Achaeans, and the gods sate by Zeus, the lord of lightning, and marveled at the great work of the mail-clad Achaeans. And Poseidon, shaker of earth, spake first to them, O Father Zeus, is there any man throughout the boundless earth that will any more declare to the immortals his mind and counsel? Seest thou not how the flowing-haired Achaeans have now again built them a wall before their ships, and drawn a fosse about it, but gave not excellent hecatombs to the gods? Verily the fame thereof shall reach as far as the dawn spreadeth, and men will forget the wall that I and Phoebus Apollo built with travail for the hero Laomedon. And Zeus the cloud-gatherer said to him, sore troubled, Out on it, far prevailing shaker of earth, for this thing thou sayest. Well might some other god fear this device, one that were far feebler than thou in the might of his hands. But thine shall be the fame as far as the dawn spreadeth. Go to now, hereafter, when the flowing-haired Achaeans be departed upon their ships to their dear native land, then burst thou this wall asunder, and scatter it all unto the sea, and cover the great sea beach over with sand again, that the great wall of the Achaeans be brought to naught of thee. Such converse was held, these one with the other, and the sun went down. So Zeus is looking down from Olympus, and he is impressed with the Greeks' work on the wall. And it is impressive, whether it's across a narrow peninsula or around a whole camp of beach ships. It's a lot of work for a single night. But Poseidon is not impressed. In fact, Poseidon is angered by the wall. Poseidon is a god that's, for the most part, on the side of the Greeks. But in this instance, he's got a reason to be upset. I suppose? His reason seems to be a little flimsy. Poseidon is upset about the wall because the Greeks began building it without making proper sacrifices to the gods. To some extent, I guess I can see Poseidon's objection here. The construction of this wall is a major undertaking, and the ancient religion required proper ritual and acknowledgement of the gods at major undertakings, whether it was leaving for battle, founding a new city, or initiating some major construction. Even today, we see remnants of these traditions, ceremonies breaking ground for new construction, or monumental cornerstones for buildings. The fact that the Greeks undertook this major construction project without sanctifying it and gaining the god's blessing is given in the text as the reason why the wall is fated one day to fall. This is the final major failure of religious observance in Book 7. However, this objection of Poseidon's, that the proper rituals weren't observed by the Greeks, seems like something that would concern one god as much as another, and Zeus isn't upset. So this really doesn't fully explain specifically why Poseidon is angered. What's maybe a little more convincing is Poseidon's worry that the fame of this amazing wall will spread, and that people will forget that he and Apollo built the walls of Troy, which, yes, they did do that many years ago for Laomedon, the previous king of Troy, and the story of why he and Apollo built the walls of Troy is interesting, but not quite interesting enough to be worth the digression right now. I'd like to say to Poseidon, look man, it's hard to imagine that a wooden wall built in one night could compare so favorably with the permanent stone walls of a city, an important city famed for its mighty and divinely built walls. Much less that this comparison could cause people to entirely forget that gods as important as you and Apollo literally built those other walls. Also, Poseidon isn't known as a god who's particularly hung up on religious niceties and the proper conduct of ritual, no more so than any of the other gods anyway. The author is fishing for a reason here, and this is one of just a few instances of inconsistent characterization in the Iliad. Otherwise, for a text that was compiled from multiple sources, it's usually very consistent in who these characters are. However, 3 of these instances now of inconsistent characterization have appeared in Book 7. To appease Poseidon, Zeus agrees that after the war, these walls can be washed away by the sea. Will that make you feel better, brother? To wreck stuff? Later on in the Iliad, there will be a fuller description of this eventual destruction of the wall, when Zeus will cause it to rain unceasingly for days. Then, swollen with rain, multiple rivers, including ones not otherwise mentioned in the Iliad, will be diverted by Apollo toward the destruction of this wooden wall, and Poseidon will heave the waves of the sea against the wall. All this will continue for 9 days until this wooden wall is destroyed. The wall that the Greeks have built in one night will take 3 gods 9 days to destroy. Oh, and in that fuller description of its destruction, the heroes of the Greeks will be referred to as emitheoi, or demigods, in the only time that term appears in the Iliad. In what may be an important clue, that single instance of the word demigod for men who are otherwise emphatically mortals and very, very much a separate race from the gods in the Iliad, more than anything else, causes me to agree with those who feel the wall represents an intrusion of older myths, imperfectly integrated into the Iliad as compiled in classical antiquity. Because it's such a major physical feature, important at times in the upcoming deep core of the Iliad's most intense battle books, the wall's imperfect integration is all the more jarring and challenging to our envisioning of the camp and the battles that will rage around it. No, the wall just doesn't make sense. Nothing about the wall makes sense, and scholars have batted this issue around for decades, centuries, without coming to a final and convincing conclusion. I certainly can't offer a convincing conclusion to this debate, but I will try my best to help you envision the action and understand the importance of this wall, this blurry, imposing, and unavoidable object that will take up so much of our time and attention as we proceed toward the deep core of the Iliad in books 8 through 15. Let's continue. We have one final scene at the Greek camp following their construction work. The work of the Achaeans was accomplished, and they slaughtered oxen amid the huts and took supper. And many ships from Lemnos bearing wine were at hand, sent of Jason's son Eueneus, whom Hypsipyle bare to Jason, shepherd of the host. And specifically for Atreus' sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus, Jason's son gave a freight of wine, even 1,000 measures. So the flowing-haired Achaeans bought them wine hence, some for bronze and some for gleaming iron, and some with hides and some with whole kine. and some with captives, and they set a rich feast before them. Then all night long feasted the flowing-haired Achaeans, and in the city the Trojans and allies. And all night long Zeus, the Lord of Counsel, devised them ill with terrible thunderings. Then pale fear gat hold upon them, and they spilt wine from their cups upon the earth, neither durst any drink till he had made libation to most mighty Cronion. Then laid they them to rest, and took the boon of sleep. Book 7 closes with some ships from Lemnos arriving at the Greek camp. These were sent by Eueneus, son of that famous hero and adventurer of the previous generation, Jason. Eueneus gives part of his shipment of wine to Agamemnon and Menelaus, and offers the rest for sale to the other Greeks in exchange for loot and captives, in what to my memory is the only instance of simple commerce in the Iliad, where the economy seems otherwise to be based on looting and sharing loot in a patronage system. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'll be on the lookout for other instances of buying and selling as we go forward. Both the Greeks at their camp and the Trojans in their city are feasting and drinking. Meanwhile, Zeus is up again all night long, planning them harm. Thunder, the sign that he's got trouble for mortals on his mind. This thunder puts fear into everyone, and a bit of a damper on the parties. Not that they stop drinking, but no one drinks without pouring a libation onto the ground to appease the angry god. Then everyone goes to sleep, and if the wine hasn't knocked them out completely, I suspect they had some bad dreams. They should be worried. There's trouble coming for everyone in Book 8. As I've mentioned before, we're about to reach what I call the deep core of the Iliad. It's a long, dark, intense series of battles, hardships, and suffering. We know who these characters are. We know why they're fighting, and we've exhausted the last hope for peace. We'll now join them through the depths of their despair, the deep core, books 8 through 15. As I may have mentioned before, and if not, I certainly will again, the Iliad is a journey whose conclusion is beautiful, heartbreaking even, but it must be earned for it to have true meaning. It's time we started paying the price. Until next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening.